As of January 1st, 2025, the e-invoicing obligation applies in Germany, and if you've missed the whole topic so far, you'll find it below in the video description. A whole series of videos where I explain individual aspects of this e-invoicing obligation. I often receive a very common comment under these videos, rightly so. And that is, Melchior, are you actually talking about this for so long? How do you create an e-invoice? And that comment is, admittedly, that's completely correct. The obligation to issue an e-invoice, that only starts in 2027 or 2028. Starting in 2025, we only need to be able to receive e-invoices. Of course, one should start dealing with it today, what one can potentially do in the future, and I'm also a fan of not waiting until the very last day when it comes to legal obligations. But today, here and now, it's much more important to focus on the question. How do you actually receive an e-invoice and how do you process it further? And we want to take a closer look at that in this video. And just receiving it isn't really a problem at all, because an e-invoice is a file, either a zip file or an XML file, and you can receive it like how you can receive such files. So, for example, as an attachment in an email, that means you just need to share your email address with your suppliers and service providers so they can send you an e-invoice. That was it in the end. But it can also be that e-invoices are simply made available to you. So, for example, in an online portal, you can find the e-invoice, i.e. the zip file or the XML file there, and then you can download it. And that way it is also considered delivered to you. That means the mere delivery, or on your side, just receiving the e-invoice isn't problematic at all. However, it becomes problematic, at least in part, when it comes to further processing. Because you can't just open and read all e-invoices like a regular file. You'll need an additional tool to actually find out what's actually in this file. And that is, of course, absolutely necessary. Because you also have to pay these invoices. An invoice isn't just for accounting, but also so that your service providers and suppliers get paid. And let's take a look at that together on my laptop. And then we'll go through the different possible formats. We are now here on my desktop and 3 invoices. These 3 invoices have different formats. First of all, a very classic PDF format. That's admittedly not a problem at all. We can simply open it by double-clicking on it. A PDF reader opens and we can read this invoice. This is not an e-invoice by new law. We will need a zip or X invoice. In the future, we will need either a zip invoice or an X invoice. A zip invoice is a combined format. This means that a zip invoice consists of a PDF and an XML file, and it can actually be opened like a PDF. And we can see that right down here. We can also just double click on it. And it looks exactly like a PDF invoice at first glance. And in fact, it's quite common that you can't even tell the difference between a zip invoice and a PDF invoice. That means you really need a tool with additional features to even see it, that this is now an e-invoice. In Adobe Acrobat Reader, for example, you can view the attachments. And if we just click on this attachment symbol right over here, we can see that there is indeed also an XML file in this PDF document as well. And in this XML attachment, the same invoice information is listed as the PDF. That means this invoice exists from an XML file and a PDF file, and that makes this document a payload file. The further processing of a payload file, that is, a payload invoice, is quite simple. You can simply open them with any PDF reader you can think of. Just open it and take a look at the PDF part of this invoice. So that's really not a problem at all. But if you upload this invoice into an accounting program, then this accounting program won't look at the PDF part, but rather the XML part. That's the big advantage. That now the software no longer has to try to recognize it visually. What now? In this invoice, but can read the invoice information directly. This XML part. And this leads to the fact that the invoice contents are recognized much more reliably, and with the more reliable recognition of the contents of the invoice, hopefully, automate accounting even further, because there are simply no more areas for interpretation. For example, when things are particularly small or contrasts in the PDF part aren't very strong, etc. That's the big advantage. For payload invoice, that means you won't have any problems in your daily life at all. When you receive payload invoices, you might not even notice it. The big problems can arise with an X invoice, and since you can't determine In which invoice format are your suppliers sending you their invoices? It can happen that you receive X invoices, and that raises the question, what do you do with it? Because when you open an X invoice normally, let's just do that once, it looks like this. That means it looks a bit like computer code. And of course, you can now try to read the information out of here. Ultimately, everything that is in this invoice is written down somewhere here. But it's not immediately obvious at first glance where I should transfer money for what and how much, and it's obviously a problem. But there are tools for that, and there are also free tools, and one free tool is offered by Elster online. And let's just take a look at that. That means if you're self-employed and you receive an X invoice, for example, and you have no idea what you should do with it, then click on the link below in the video description. Then you come to a free tool. You don't even have to log into Elster online, and then you can upload your invoices there to show you what's actually in there. When you click on the link, you'll land on this page, and up here it says, Visualize e-invoice. And here you can easily upload a file now. And well, I'll just do that once. Here is the invoice. RE25 XML, that means this is the X invoice that we just looked at. And I can upload it here now, and then the invoice information will simply be displayed to me visually. And now I see who actually issued the invoice to me. If I scroll down, I can see what was this invoice actually issued for, how much VAT was indicated, what are the payment terms, where am I actually supposed to make the payment, what was actually billed, and so on. So I can now quickly see what the invoice was actually for and so on. And now I can of course copy this information, for example, into the transfer order in my online banking and then simply execute this transfer. That means an X invoice is basically not a problem at all. But I know that most of you aren't working in a vacuum anyway. And just having an email address and a bank account isn't enough. Most of you already have an accounting program anyway. And if you have an accounting program that means something, then it has an e-invoicing function. And then you can simply upload this XML file, that is, the X invoice, into your accounting program just like you would upload any other invoice. And then it will simply show you what is on this invoice. And let's take a look at that as well. And for that, I'll switch to my LexWare Office account. LexWare Office basically looks like this. So here you have an overview, a balance, and so on. And up here, you can click on Add Document. And then in the next step, you can simply upload this invoice. Here you select the X invoice. Click on Open, and then it opens the invoice and also visualizes the XML file. That means the invoice is also visualized here, so that you can check it. So you know what's actually in this XML file. And it's not just that it's visualized here on the left side, but is fulfilled, just as I said, directly. Fields, so the document data, the categorization, and the document status from the information that is in this XML file. And this means that accounting will simply go even faster in the future, because software doesn't have to interpret it anymore. Who is the invoice recipient and who is the invoice sender, and so on. But because it can be read directly, it can be read out. And all of that is located here on the right side. Of course, you can and should urgently correct that if mistakes were made here, and then you can simply save everything. And then you have recorded the invoice in your accounting program. With LexWare Office, you have the great advantage that you can even have a bank account directly from LexWare Office. And then you can also execute the transfer directly there. And then you don't even need the reader from Elster Online. The changes starting from January 2025 are not that significant. First, there is still no obligation to issue electronic invoices, not for your suppliers or service providers either. That means you will not only receive electronic invoices, but you can still get invoices in other formats. And you won't have any problems at all for now. For example, when you receive a PDF invoice. And you won't have any problems at all in the future and won't have to change anything at all. For example, when you receive a horse invoice, because you can process it just like a normal PDF file. If you receive an X invoice now, I recommend either using an accounting program like this. I'll link a few recommendations for you down in the video description. Or you simply use this free service from Elster Online. With Elster Online, you can also be sure that this data from your invoices is not used for commercial purposes in any way. Because Elster Online is the website of the tax office, and they have no interest in that. Now, just a side business. In terms of building a data trade, they just want you to handle your taxes properly and pay your taxes. That's the only interest of the tax office. That said, I personally recommend this reader from Elster Online, at least if you don't have a professional accounting program. If you have any questions about processing e-invoices, receiving e-invoices, or perhaps even about issuing e-invoices, then let me know in the comments section below and I'll be happy to help you. If you want updates on what lawmakers create about taxes, subscribe. For updates, subscribe for updates. I'll link that here, or you can just check out one of the other videos on this channel, like this one or this one.